Chapter 4: Peaceful Protests. Lunch Counter Sit-ins. John and the other students were ready to launch their first peaceful protest. They organized a sit-in. The plan? They would sit down at a lunch counter. Then, when workers refused to serve them, they would not leave. They would just sit quietly until the store closed. The next day, they would come back and do it again. At first, the white store owners were confused. Then they got mad. They tried to get the protesters to leave. They yelled horrible things and tried to pull them off the stools. They beat John and the others and dumped food on their heads. The police came, but they arrested the protesters. It was John's first arrest. Even though John and the other protesters were in jail, the sit-ins continued. When other students heard what happened, they came out to protest too. Eventually, they formed an organization called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. 3 lawyers agreed to help John and the others at no charge. When the protesters got out of jail, they began to plot their next move. Then one night, they got a call. The house of one of their lawyers had been bombed. Luckily, no one was hurt, but the violence had gone too far. Finally, the mayor said that the lunch counters should be desegregated. On May 10, 1960, Nashville lunch counters served black customers for the first time. The protesters had won one battle, but there was still more to do. Freedom rides. The SNCC continued their protests around the South. They protested segregation in movie theaters and restaurants. Other organizations joined in too. A group called the Congress of Racial Equality reached out to John. They had a plan for a protest called the Freedom Rides. The Freedom Riders wanted to end segregation in bus stations. The waiting rooms and restrooms in bus stations in the South still didn't allow black people. The law said they had to, but it was not usually enforced. John traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet the Freedom Riders, led by a man named James Farmer. The group spent weeks preparing for their protest. Then, on May 4, 1961, John and the rest of the protesters began their bus ride. The Freedom Riders were a mixed group of black and white people. Their plan was to go into bus station waiting spaces together. The law said they had the right to do that. They wanted to see if the law was being enforced. At their first stop in the South, they tried to enter the station together. They were attacked. The riders kept going. But a terrible thing happened. While John was away for a day, the Freedom Riders bus was bombed. The riders escaped, only to be beaten by an angry mob. John worried about his friends. It could have been him on the bus. John Farmer called off the rides. It was too dangerous. But Diane Nash, a member of the SNCC, said no. Protesters like herself and John would never give up. They would continue to fight using nonviolence wherever they found injustice.